Broadcasting live from the Capital OTB studios, this is Racing Across America with Seth Merrow.
Good morning and welcome to Racing Across America on this Saturday morning. I'm Seth Merrow. Thanks for joining us. Thanks also to our friends at Woodbine for their sponsorship of this program, some of the other programming and events here at Capital OTB. Woodbine, pick, bet, and cheer on great racing north of the border. We're actually taping this on Friday because we have the Finger Lakes road trip. So I expect as you are watching this, I'm probably on the thruway headed west towards Finger Lakes. But I thought we would do a little week before Derby conversation. All three of my guests this morning are voters on the NTRA poll, which includes this time of year the 3-year-old poll. So they have some 3-year-old thoughts. Certainly a little bit later on, John White from Santa Anita. He also wrote an article online that took a little early look at potential morning line odds for the Derby field. John also, every year we like to talk to him about his strike list thoughts, and last year Justify upset the apple cart a little bit as far as the strikes, but it takes a look at some of the key factors and then plugs them into the Derby field and who has the least amount of strikes and maybe horses you want to take an extra look at. So John coming up a little bit later on. Also Mike PENA from the Horse Racing Radio Network. As I say, he's a NTRA poll voter and has some Derby thoughts, but also wanted to talk to Mike about an accolade they received about a week and a half ago, so we'll hit on that. But we're going to kick things off with our friend Bob Ehalt. You see his work in America's Best Racing, Thoroughbred Racing Commentary, Blood Horse, and more. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Seth. Pleasure to be with you.
And why don't we start right off, because as I communicated back and forth with you yesterday, I noted and I mentioned you can find Bob's work at various venues, and I link to them often on Equidillion. In fact, as I looked this morning, I had a couple of your articles right up towards the top of the page. But it sounds like folks will be able to find more and more of your work now at Blood Horse.
Yes, I'm going to be working as a New York correspondent for Blood Horse, working exclusively for them from an editorial standpoint. So looking forward to that, and give me an opportunity to really focus more on New York racing and also do a good number of national events for them too, like the Breeders' Cup and the Preakness. So it's a very good opportunity I'm looking forward to.
And of course, we cross paths with Bob quite often up in the Saratoga press box and at other venues as well, Aqueduct and Belmont when we go down for the big events. And Bob was down at the Pegasus as well at Gulfstream when we were down there. And I'm assuming that the Saratoga schedule will at least stay the same for you, if not expand. Yeah,
pretty much. As I say, it's just a good opportunity to kind of lock things in and take a little bit of the unpredictability out of my personal life. So it worked out very well.
Yeah, I'm happy for you. That's great. So again, you can look for more of Bob's work at the Blood Horse from here going forward. And I mentioned Mike PENA and Horse Racing Radio Network, a little accolade last week. We'll talk a little bit Sovereign Awards with Mike, but press release hit my inbox last night from Dave Joseph via the Preakness, and Bob Ehalt will receive the David F. Woods Award for Excellence in Journalism regarding last year's Preakness coverage. You had an article called Baffert and the Triple Crown, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. It's unprecedented. So again, the Excellence in Journalism Award. And from the press release, it's your second time winning the David F. Woods Award. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Seth. It's a great honor. It's really it's a very nice award. They have a very nice ceremony at what they call the Alibi Breakfast on the Thursday of Preakness week, where people kind of come up. It's very lighthearted. People come up and talk, but they do have some nice honorees for myself and best photography. They have an Old Hilltop Award and it's always a great honor to be included when you look at some of the list of the past recipients to join them again. So it's very, very nice honor.
Yeah, certainly when it came as I say, in the inbox, I was smiling that you grabbed the award, so congratulations there. All right, as noted at the top of the show, I want to do a little Derby conversation. You are an NTRA poll voter, so I saw what came out on Monday. You have Omaha Beach on top, but Bob, while we talk, first I wanted to get some thoughts on the horse you have right underneath, Tacitus, because you're a New York-based guy, obviously. We were down at the Wood Memorial covering that, so I got a chance to see this one. We're going to take a look at Tacitus, the number 2 horse, get the victory in the Wood. Number 1, Tex, finishes second. Number 4, Heichel, runs third in here. Beginning of the race, obviously, there was the crowding by Jovia, and Tacitus took a little bit of the worst of that, but overcame it. So it was a nice victory in the Wood Memorial. As I say, you have Omaha Beach on top, but Tacitus right underneath. So let's start with that New York entrant from Bill Mott. What are your thoughts on Tacitus heading to the Derby?
I was very impressed with the victory in the Wood. As you mentioned, he had a very troubled start. He had every reason to kind of fold up and just not turn in any kind of an effort in that race, and he would have had a big-time excuse. But he showed a great deal of tenacity. He went wide on the turn. Maybe he came in a little bit. I know some people have talked about that, but I just think it was the kind of performance, especially for a young horse who really does not have that much racing, to put in an effort like that. I think that was a great educational effort for him. To get him ready for running against 20 horses in the Kentucky Derby, where there's usually problems that a horse with his running style is going to have to overcome. So I really think he's a horse who I think you have to put him among the top contenders in the race, and certainly I think there'll be a lot of people with smiles on their face if Bill Mott could get his first Kentucky Derby victory.
I was going to say that because over the last couple of weeks I have run into people who have exactly that sentiment. There are some folks in the game that people root for, and particularly when you get to a race like that. I think Shug winning a few years ago made a lot of people happy, but I think Bill Mott winning would certainly, as you say, please a lot of people in the game.
Yeah, I mean, Bill is just a class guy who just does tremendous work. Never really had a problem. I mean, that we could really talk in detail about. But I think I just think Bill is just a tremendous trader, and I think he's showing. He never had that reputation as a Triple Crown trader, but the last few years, I think he's really come up with some nice horses, and as I say, I think it would be a real fitting addition to his resume.
Yeah, and you look at, it lightly raced, only 4 starts, a couple of starts last year as a 2-year-old, but it just said a lot to me that coming out of the maiden victory, he had 2 starts last year, first start runs 4, second start wins, then lays off from November, and it said a lot to me. As you know, Bill Mott is a guy who you think of as kind of conservative, but that he came back off the maiden victory and in the seasonal debut to win the Tampa Bay Derby, I thought was very notable for Tacitus.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, as I say, the fact that he is so relatively inexperienced, and when you look at the other end of the picture, he had Hidden Scroll, who won that maiden race in such impressive fashion, and really couldn't go on with it. I mean, I thought he put in a good effort in the Fountain of Youth, but it just seemed he was being rushed into some big assignments. Well, this horse had only one more race than Hidden Scroll, and he's really handled it at Thrive. So I think you have to believe this horse really has his better days ahead of him. And we'll see if the first Saturday in May turns out to be the time he runs the race of his life.
Yeah, it certainly has been impressive in the first 2 starts of the 3-year-old season. All right, let's get some thoughts on your top pick, Omaha Beach. What did you take away from the Arkansas Derby with regards to Omaha Beach?
Well, I think, one of the things I think that, depending on how people look at it, I view the poll as the most accomplished horse. I think when you look at what horse has done the most in his 3-year-old campaign, certainly Omaha Beach really has. I mean, you beat Game Winner in one race, Improbable the next. You're definitely the horse to beat. He's a deserving favorite in the Kentucky Derby. Now, is he going to win the Derby? That's the question. That's the one I'm not sure of. I have my own thoughts is that I do think there's going to be a lively pace. I think even though there's not a lot of speed horses, Maximum Security, I think, is going to cut out a pretty lively pace. Question is, will Omaha Beach be able to stay far enough off it that he could win the Kentucky Derby at the mile and a quarter? The big question. I'm not so sure of that. And plus, after all these years of a favorite winning the Kentucky Derby, isn't it finally time for somebody other than a favorite to win the race? So I think he's a quality racehorse. He's going to be a deserving favorite. Will I bet on him? Hey, it's the Kentucky Derby. There's 20 horses. I think you want to probably find a little bit more value in somebody.
Well, that's a great point, because the NTRA poll is a 3-year-old poll. It's not necessarily a Derby poll. So as you say, you're looking at the overall season and who has the most accomplished record at this point. So we're a week out. We're not going to hold you to it. Obviously, the post position draw is important as well. But who would you tilt towards as maybe your Derby pick?
Right now, I'm kind of leaning toward Game Winner. I've always been impressed by following the sport since going back to 1971. What has always stood out with me is that when you get a 2-year-old champion who could withstand the rigors of the Triple Crown and get himself into the Kentucky Derby in a prominent position, they usually turn in a big effort. You look at the recent years, you had American Pharaoh, Nyquist, 2-year-old champions who won the Kentucky Derby. Last year we had Good Magic, who was second. So in the space of that 4 years, you get 2 wins and a second. That gives me confidence, especially when Game Winner is trained by Bob Baffert. I'm a little dismayed that he didn't go by and win his 2 preps. But the owner, Gary West, has told me the plan was to get the horse to take incremental steps forward, which I think he did. And with Bob Baffert calling the shots, I really think he's going to run his best race. He's already won a race at Churchill Downs, which I think is an important factor. So we know he can handle it. I know the track was fast, but that was kind of a wet weekend at Churchill, so I think there was some moisture in it. I don't think if it rains that will bother him. And I'm going to bank that this is a throwback from Bob Baffert, where if you look at Baffert recently, Baffert's horses win the preps. Well, let's go back early in the process. Baffert had horses like Real Quiet, who didn't win the preps, but was on his best on Derby Day. I'm going to kind of go with Game Winner following that formula.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what Game Winner winds up as they walk into the gate, because a lot of people are tilting towards Game Winner, it seems like, as they talk to people over the last week or so. So that's going to be interesting to see odds-wise. I talked about the various articles of yours I have linked over on Equidaily, and one of them is a nice article over on ABR, America's Best Racing, where you talk about which of the prep races over the past decade have been the most productive. Talk a little bit about that angle if folks want to plug that into their handicapping.
Yeah, it was just kind of a way of putting together a little point system of what preps did the horses come out of in recent years, because you could kind of look historically. The Florida Derby, I believe, is the number one leader, but when you're going all time into the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, what bearing does that have? So basically, what it kind of shows is that realistically, the main preps have been the dominant one. The key preps have been the Arkansas Derby, the Florida Derby, and the Santa Anita Derby. Those seem to be the races that are attracting the big horses, and certainly if your horses are coming out of those races, I think you have to give them some special notice. it doesn't exactly point you to the winner exactly, but I think it kind of shows you the direction. And it does, like we say when we talk about Tacitus, well, the problem is, when was the last time the Wood had a big horse in the Kentucky Derby? So that's one of the things you might want to keep in mind through that and some of the other preps. So basically, in horse racing, horsemen are a lot of times creatures of habit. And that's where, as I say, a horse like, say, Game Winner coming out of the Santa Anita Derby, you know that he's got a quality race under his belt, and that you have to give him a little bit of special consideration.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me from that article was barely a mention. I don't know whether it was mentioned at all, the Wood, as you say. And I pulled up while we were talking. I've got the winners of the Wood, and I'll read off the last, 6 or 7. Nice stakes quality horses, but they don't jump off the page as being superstars. Vina Rosso last year, Irish Warcry, Outwork, Frosted, Wicked Strong, Verrazano, Gemologist. As I say, nice horses, but they don't jump off as being, they were real players on the Triple Crown scene necessarily. And that, and you're in the same boat as I am. We remember the Wood back in the day, and I wonder if it is a function of the calendar. I looked earlier today. Secretariat's Wood Memorial was on the 21st of April. The Derby was May 3rd, couple of weeks. And I remember that was the schedule, a couple of weeks for the last major prep races. You have layoffs back then like you have today. You would automatically throw out some of those horses. This year, the Wood was about a month ahead of time. And I'm wondering if the calendar hasn't affected the Wood, where being in the beginning of April, if you were to bring a horse to New York to train, you would now be in March, and so the weather becomes a little bit of a factor. And I wonder if the different date hasn't been what has had some kind of an effect on the Wood over the past decade or so.
Yeah, the timing. Remember back in those days, the timing of the races were all different. I mean, I think there was a horse, I believe Jim French. If you go back in 1971. I think Jim French ran in the Wood and the Santa Anita Derby. There was a lot of different things, but I think the biggest thing that comes into play is the popularity of the Florida racing. If you go back into the 70s and 80s, the Florida racing wasn't as completely popular with, say, the New York horsemen as it is now. The Florida Derby was a little bit early. Everything was earlier in the year because you had the Flamingo, you had the Florida Derby, and I think a lot of New Yorkers were just conditioned to, we'll start our season at some point in March and go forward. Now with so many horses, now basically if you have a top 2-year-old, everybody's ready to send them down to Florida. So the top horses go to Florida to train because the weather is so much better. They have, I think, the emergence of these places, like say Payson Park, where these horsemen have their own, almost have like great space and room to train their horses, has just made it such a popular destination. And I think that kind of comes into play. That right now the mentality is, good horse, take him to Florida. If you're out west, you might look toward Oaklawn too a little bit. And certainly the emergence of Bob Baffert as the Triple Crown king changes the ballpark because, when you go back into the 70s and 80s, the dominant trainer out west, Charlie Whittingham, really didn't have a big hand in the Derby until the latter end of his career. So I think there's just a totally different outlook in racing that kind of makes New York, because of the weather, more in line with the secondary horses that kind of stay here.
Well, one of the horses I'm looking at, and I think could be interesting in the Derby, is Spinoff. And he's a perfect example of that now 21st century, 2019 kind of timing. He hasn't been on the track racing since the Louisiana Derby. That was March 23rd, and then goes back down to Florida, and well into April, he was still training down at Palm Beach Downs for Pletcher. But I think that layoff from March 23rd. As I say, when you and I first got into the game, you would toss out a horse who hadn't been seen since then going to the Derby. But I think this goes right into Pletcher's wheelhouse, and other trainers too, but particularly Pletcher, a layoff like that. So the game certainly has changed.
The game definitely has changed, and I think though one of the problems that you run into with these preps is that particular race, because that is, I think, a bit of a lengthy layoff, and you get to the position where you almost want to run the horse one more time, but you're sort of afraid. A lot of these guys are kind of they look at these like Ragozin numbers, and you're afraid of jamming races, and you're kind of looking to get a horse to peak, so you feel he's ready for this big effort, and I'm going to not run him, and it doesn't always work out that way. And then sometimes the whole idea of getting to the Derby makes horsemen do something, put them in binds where they maybe aren't doing the right thing in terms of what might benefit the horse long range, but the focus is so big on just being and competing in the Derby that, you say, well, if I just keep him in the barn, what have we got to lose? And I think sometimes, I think, as I say, the Louisiana Derby, if to have that much time off with a 3-year-old at this time of year, I'm not sure how beneficial that is. Yeah. Whereas later in the year, as shown by Bob Baffert in particular, you can give, I think, the horse a little bit more time to rest, recover, and go forward. This is a developmental period where horses can make big jumps from race to race, and I think you want to get them out there. So, yeah, it is a totally no different situation than, say, if depending on how far back into your involvement in racing goes.
Yeah, some of the newer folks may not be. You think, what, the major prep was only 2 weeks away? Unheard of. Or
even. I mean, we would talk about Conquistador Cielo, who won a race earlier in the week and won the Belmont by the length of the racetrack. And
not just a race. You're kind of throwing that out there. It was the Met Mile.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was that type of a performance, and as I say, I think people would get a big kick if you could get the lifetime PPs of that horse, Jim French. Johnny Campo trained him, and I think he was second in the Preakness, the Derby of the Preakness in the year to Canyonero II. And you just look at the races he was running in. He was really one of the first, I imagine, flyers. I'm not sure how they did it back in 1971, because as I say, he was in California, he was in Florida, he was in New York. He ran in virtually all of the big preps. Where these days horses run in one of them. He ran about 3 or 4 of them, because I think he ran the Gotham, the Florida race, one of the Florida Derby, or the Flamingo, the Santa Anita Derby, the Wood, and then he's in the Kentucky Derby. It was just amazing what horses did. As I say, it was a while ago in 1971, but totally a different era these days.
It is completely a different era when you think about those kind of things. Bob, got to let you go, but we certainly appreciate the visit and your thoughts. We'll be looking for more and more of your work in the Blood Horse, and certainly we look forward to seeing you in person. We'll probably be headed down Belmont Stakes weekend, probably see you there, and of course, we'll see you multiple times up in the Saratoga press box.
Seth, looking forward to seeing you. Take care. Good luck, and good luck on your trip to Figure Lake.
Appreciate that. Bobby Halt. Again, look for more and more of his work coming up in the Blood Horse, is now the New York correspondent. All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, Mike PENA from the Horse Racing Radio Network. Stay tuned.
Pick, bet, and cheer on live racing from Woodbine and Mohawk Park. Thoroughbred and harness action. The wagers are just the beginning. Watch award-winning broadcasts covering both breeds, incredible battles contested over the most unique grass course in North America. Experience the full fields with over 130 thoroughbred and 160 live harness days. Get access to free handicapping material and join the ranks of Woodbine and Mohawk Park players from all over the globe. For more information, visit woodbine.com.
Here in upstate New York, no one provides bettors with more wagering options than Capital OTB. Our network of branch and easy bet locations stretches from the mid-Hudson Valley all the way to the Canadian border and west to central New York. So whether you need to place a bet, fund your Capital Bets account, or watch the next big race, all the action is just around the corner. A full list of our branch and easy bet locations can be found online at capitalotb.com. Capital OTB, the better and most convenient choice for wagering in upstate New York.
No matter where in the world you are, the excitement of wagering on horse racing is just a click away. You'll get live streaming, past performances, race replays, our virtual tote board, analysis and selections from professional handicappers, a simple, safe, and secure wagering platform, and best of all, you get track prices. CapitalOTBBet.com. Bet any place, anytime at CapitalOTBBet.com. And be sure to download our new mobile app from the iTunes Store or Google Play.
What if there was a way to become a better horse player, to have a better knowledge of the game, to be more successful? What if there were a way to take what you've learned, what you know, and make better decisions, better choices, to know how to connect the dots? In horse racing, knowledge is a powerful tool, but not the only tool. Race results and replays, past performances and live streaming, wagering from all your digital devices. These too are important tools, and you'll find them all right here at Capital OTB. Capital OTB. Become a better horse player.
Welcome back to Racing Across America on this Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us. As promised before the break, joined now by our friend Mike PENA from the Horse Racing Radio Network. Haven't talked to Mike in a while, but I thought we'd catch up a little bit on HRRN in general and get some of his Derby thoughts as well. Mike, good morning.
Seth, good morning. Thanks for having me.
And I hinted at it at the top of the show, and I have to do it right at the beginning here because I want to tip my cap, go back about a week and a half. Sovereign Awards. Last week, typically they come a couple of days before the Woodbine meet opens up, and if folks aren't familiar, the Sovereign Awards are the Canadian equivalent of the Eclipse Awards, Horse of the Year, the leaders in the various divisions, and there are also media awards. And Horse Racing Radio Network picked up one of the Media Sovereign Awards for your coverage of the Queen's Plate. Congratulations.
Seth, thank you very much. Yeah, it was quite a thrill, and as you know, quite an honor to have people think enough of our work and our production to vote for us and to credit us with an award like that. It's really special, and it's really humbling, and can't thank everybody in Canada enough for all their support, and everybody at Woodbine for everything they've done for us the past several years. You make that trip as well, and you know how special that race is and that event, and how special the folks are at Woodbine, the way they treat us when we're there. They're really happy to see the media, and they bend over backwards to take care of you.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that. The Woodbine folks are fabulous, and they do a great job, which I think has benefited them as well as those of us who cover the race, because it gives their racing more exposure. So it's a great partnership between the media and the folks up there who take care of the media. When I read the result the next day, I was really happy for you and Michelle and everybody at the Horse Racing Radio Network. We see you at a lot of the venues we go to. Down at Gulfstream, you're typically a couple of feet away, your table from our table for the coverage. And I just have to ask, because we do similar kind of things. I'm in here on the TV side, you guys on the radio side. But we're in kind of a bubble, as it were. Neither of us are in front of a studio audience. And I know during the Saratoga meet, a lot of folks recognize me from television and will walk up when given that opportunity to say, hello, appreciate the programming. But most of the year, I'm in this little studio, and occasionally you get the complimentary tweet or the email, but for the most part, you're just kind of, you're doing good work, you're doing good work, but I have to assume when you get an award like that, it helps to kind of validate the hard work you put in day after day.
Yeah, it really does, and it's always shocking to me that, that when we started this 15 years ago, that it would end up where it has, and when people do think enough of your work to give you an honor like that and an award like that, it does validate it. It's pretty special to know that people are paying attention and they appreciate everything that you're doing. And it's not just me; it's our entire team that was part of that. I told a story when I accepted the award about 10 days ago that the broadcast wasn't without its challenges. And you know how things work behind the scenes. You don't always see what goes on, and all people see when they watch you on television or hear us on radio is the product that goes out in front of them. But about halfway through our 2-hour broadcast of the Queen's Plate last year, if you remember, it was really windy that day, and there were gusts that kept coming through.
and Woodbine had set us up on the apron at about the 8th pole, and they gave us a pop-up tent with sides on it to block the wind, and it worked fine for about the first hour of the show. But then right about the halfway mark, a gust of wind came, and it blew the tent off of the platform that it was seated on. And my wife, Michelle, was producing the program. She claims that she's 5 feet tall. I'm not sure that's actually true. But she was reaching up with her right hand, Seth, and she's holding on to the tent to keep it in place while she's producing the show and pushing the buttons with her left hand to get our trackside reporters in and to work with our levels and all that kind of stuff that she had to do. And in the meantime, she's trying to call Woodbine and have somebody from the facilities department come down to help with the tent. So nobody knew that was going on. Of course, we tried to make that seamless, and I guess it was. So you just never know what goes on behind the scenes. But really, she deserves a huge round of applause for all her work and keeping that broadcast on the air.
Yeah, it could have been a Dorothy Wizard of Oz kind of moment there. That wouldn't have been good.
Very, very much so. It crazy. You know how that works.
I do.
People don't always know what goes on behind the scenes of any of these broadcasts, whether it's us or NBC or what you're doing on Capital OTB. People just don't know, and the things we have to fight through sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. Plenty of this stuff goes on behind the scenes that people aren't familiar with, but hopefully it all shows up nicely on broadcast. Obviously it did with you folks picking up the Sovereign Award, and again, congratulations there. Before we get into some Derby thoughts, again, let's get back to HRRN and talk a little bit about the Derby schedule that you have coming up next week.
Yeah, we kick it off on Tuesday morning. We'll be set up on the backside of Churchill Downs. They have that media area with all the tents where you see the television stations and the various radio stations that are there. And we'll have our tent set up about 20 yards from the main track, right there on the backside, looking at the Twin Spires. And we'll kick it off with 3 consecutive Derby countdown shows, which are our morning shows that air from 8 to 10 Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings. And then we come back Friday afternoon with our coverage of the Kentucky Oaks, which begins at 4 o'clock Eastern, and then our coverage of the Derby undercard and the entire Kentucky Derby, which we do in partnership with NBC Sports and Westwood One. That comes up on Saturday. So it's a full slate, almost 15 hours of on-site Derby Week programming, and folks can go to our website, horseracingradio.net, to check out the schedule.
Yeah, and I laugh and I smile when you talk about partnering up with NBC, and you guys are prominent now at the Breeders' Cup as well, because you talked about when you started going back 15 years or so. I remember you and your original partner table by the Paddock Mutual Bays up in Saratoga.
By the shoe board.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right by the shoe board.
Yeah.
Pete Coulis. And he's somebody else. He passed away several years ago, but he's somebody else that I owe a huge debt of gratitude to, because without him giving me an opportunity to sit in with him on his local radio show here in Lexington 15 years ago, actually I guess it was 16 years ago, none of this ever would have been possible. So yeah, it's amazing to think of how far it's come, and we've had locations at Churchill Downs where we were out back by the paddock area and couldn't even see a horse in the paddock. We were kind of tucked around the corner doing the show off of a television monitor and describing what was happening back in the early days. And now to think that we're sitting in a booth just a couple doors down from Larry Colmus, where he calls the Kentucky Derby, and we're overlooking the finish line doing the national radio broadcast, is really I'll tell you, every year that I get up there, the first thing I do is I stop and I look out over Churchill Downs. It's quiet. Nobody else is up there yet. And, you think back on where this started and where it is today, and it's, it gets a little emotional for sure.
Yeah, it's I'm happy for you guys. As I say, it's a great crew. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, we were down covering the Wood Memorial, and we commandeered Anthony Stabile's office. And of course, he does great work for you guys as well. You have a great team, and so as I say, happy for you guys and the success you've had. All right, let's shift attention. I said at the top of the show, all my guests this week, voters on the NTRA poll, which this time of year includes the 3-year-olds, and I pulled up your 3-year-old top 10 via the NTRA. Top 5, Roadster, Omaha Beach, Game Winner, Maximum Security, and Tacitus. Let's talk about some of your top horses here. First of all, give us your thoughts on Roadster coming into the Derby off the Arkansas Trail, or off the Santa Anita Trail.
I know Omaha Beach is most people's number one, but I'm sticking with Roadster. I liked his race in the Santa Anita Derby a lot. I thought he showed a lot of maturity, and we had a chance to visit with Hall of Fame jockey Mike Smith prior to that race, and he talked about the fact that the horse was giving up some experience. The horses like Game Winner, who he beat, like Instagram, and he'd have to kind of overcome that lack of experience. But he said if he can do that, and if he can overcome that and run a big race in the Santa Anita Derby, he is that kind of horse. And he said it a couple of times. So that really caught my attention. And then when I saw this horse kind of be up close and drop back and ease off the pace and relax and then make that one run and outgame Game Winner, who, look, I think he's a major player too, looking ahead to next Saturday. And to outgame the juvenile champion, I thought that was a very, very good race for Roadster. And I still think that he could turn out to be the best of the three Bob Baffert.
Yeah, we were down at the Florida Derby covering that, and we got in a little bit early. So that Wednesday they had the 2-year-old sale, and Baffert was there. Took the chance to interview him, and I said, we talked a little bit about the 2-year-old sale, and then I said, catch me up on your 3-year-olds, and I mentioned Mucho Gusto and Improbable and Game Winner, and he interrupted and said, wait, what about Roadster? I was talking with Frank Miramati. I had interviewed him about a week later, and I reiterated that story, and he said, same thing happened to me. I brought up some of the other 3-year-olds, and Baffert went back to Roadster. And that to me is a little bit interesting, that Baffert, in the back of his mind, before the Santa Anita Derby even, thought, Roadster is certainly worth talking about. And when Baffert has that kind of focus, that certainly is worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I think so too. And you look at the body of work that he's put in. He's 3 for 4 lifetime. His only defeat coming to Game Winner last year in the Del Mar Futurity, and now he's proven he can turn the tables on that rival. I think there's a lot of things to like about Roadster, and I think there's a lot of things to like about Game Winner too. I mean, his 2 losses this year have come in game fashion and by very narrow margins. I think he could be sitting on a really big effort, and we know that he likes Churchill Downs, having won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile there last November.
You mentioned Omaha Beach. You have him in the number 2 position. We'll take a look at the Arkansas Derby stretch run here. Omaha Beach will be the number 3. Number 1 is Improbable. Country House, the Bill Mott horse, runs 3rd, the number 8. I talked about this 3-year-old Derby prep trail for a long time as just being a lot like last year, where somebody would step forward and a couple of weeks later, or 3 or 4 weeks later, would not be able to validate it. But that kind of changed on the last weekend with Tacitus putting a couple together, and as we're watching the stretch run here, Omaha Beach putting a couple together. And that's kind of what stands out to me for this horse. In a season, a Derby prep season, where they were kind of beating up on each other, Omaha Beach putting a couple together stands out.
Well, there have been 29 Derby prep races contested in the United States in 2019. We've had 26 different winners of those prep races. Yeah, only War of Will, Omaha Beach, and Tacitus have won multiple Derby preps. And this win by Omaha Beach, I mean, I like the fact that he was able to show a couple different gears in there. And as you're watching that race, you see him make that somewhat early move, and I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of strange because Improbable ended up going up there with him, and I figured, okay, the 2 best horses are going to duel it out from here, and they did. But the fact that he was able to make that move, settle again, and then finish off a very game Improbable, I thought was impressive. And so many jockeys have told us over the years that if you're going to win the Kentucky Derby with 20 horses in there, you need a horse that can make a move in the middle of the race, get into a hole in a position where they want him to be, settle again, make another move, and then maybe make a third move, too, to win it. So he showed a lot of maturity. He showed that he can do that, and I think that makes him very dangerous.
Let me ask you if you have anything clever you're looking at. I see number 10 on your list is Cloquet Parfait. I'm not sure what to make of that UAE race, and I'm shying away a little bit from those. As I say, he's down in your number 10 spot, so you're not putting him up definitely in the mix also. But as I say, when you're thinking about maybe putting together some of those exotics and looking for a little bit of a price, for me, my top pick may be a price. And I'm reserving the right to switch as the week progresses. But I'm thinking Spinoff is a little bit interesting from Pletcher. But your clever horse, do you have one at this point?
Boy, I really liked High Cal last time out in the Wood Memorial.
I think he's interesting too.
He's interesting because he can finish.
Yeah.
And a mile and a quarter should be right up his alley. The problem is I think he may find himself too far back. He may have too much to do when they turn for home, but he's not going to shy away from the distance. He'll be a horse that's running at the end. I think he could be a little interesting. I think that story with Kieran and Rajiv teaming up here is pretty cool, and it would be great to see them. They're good friends. It would be great to see them get the victory together. I think maybe High Call would be kind of my wise guy horse. I've heard good things about By My Standard, although I haven't seen him yet. I've heard he's trained extremely well coming out of that Louisiana Derby, but obviously he has to buck some history there. You have to go back to Grindstone to find the last Louisiana Derby winner to go on and win the Kentucky Derby. So, and how about Code of Honor? I guess I'm looking at another one. You're talking about Shug McGahee, the Hall of Fame trainer. He'll give a leg up to Hall of Fame jockey Johnny V, John Velasquez, two of the best in the business. And Code of Honor, his work here at Keeneland last week was excellent. Really did it on his own. I think he could be coming up to the race the right way.
Yeah, and as in much of this field, Code of Honor, I think you have a horse trained by Shug that has some legitimate credentials that I think is going to get away a little bit of a price, because I think it's that kind of field. I think the favorite's going to be 9-2, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's especially considering the wide open nature of this year's Derby prep season. I can certainly see a scenario where we're talking about a 9-2 favorite very, very easily.
Mike, before we let you go, again, the website, horseracingradio.net. I am looking on it on my computer as we speak, and we talked a little bit about the Derby schedule, and as I say, haven't had you on in a while, so just remind people the regular schedule for HRRN, because you do some great regular shows. As I say, Stabile is a regular with you guys, and one of the things I like is the trainer talk, where you get... I always say on the Saturday mornings here when I'm in the studio and I have trainers by phone, we concentrate more on their horses in the stakes that afternoon. Hey, talk a little bit about how horse A or horse B is coming into the race. But when I can get them for 15 or 20 minutes up at Saratoga, it's a little more of the background and a little more of an opportunity to introduce people to some of the personalities. And I get the feeling that trainer talk, from listening to those interviews, you have the same kind of a mindset there. But talk a little bit about your regular schedule at HRRN.
Yeah, both our Trainer Talk and our Jock Talk show. Trainer Talk airs Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, and Jock Talk is Tuesday night at 6 o'clock Eastern. And both of those shows are designed to really get into the backgrounds of those individuals, their life, their careers, some of the people that helped them along the way. Oftentimes we go back to the very beginning of talking about where they grew up. For example, Bill Mott, a native of Mobridge, South Dakota, came on the program, and at that point we were only interviewing trainers for 30 minutes and not a full hour visit. And Bill, when I called him to come on the show, said, "Geez, Mike, I don't know if I can talk about myself for 30 minutes." I said, "Bill, you'll be fine, trust me." He came on the air, and Seth, I swear, we had just gotten to Cigar when we had to wrap it up, because he spent about 20 minutes of the 30 minutes talking about Mobridge, South Dakota, and he had so much fun. It was just tremendous. So I've got to do part 2 with Bill Mott, especially if he can pull off a win in this Kentucky Derby on Saturday. But in terms of the entire schedule, we kind of kick it off on Tuesdays with our Jock Talk show, and then we come back on Wednesday afternoons with our Express Bet radio program that Anthony hosts from 3 to 6. We have Trainer Talk that evening, 6 o'clock Eastern. On Thursday, we have another Express Bet radio. Then our call-in show that is Thursday night, and then Fridays is Express Bet Radio again at 3 o'clock, and our Naira Bets Weekend Stakes preview at 6 o'clock Eastern, and then we turn it over to Equine Forum every Saturday morning from 8 to 10, and then, of course, our live race coverage on Saturday afternoon throughout much of the year.
And again, horseracingradio.net, folks can check out the schedule and the programming's archived and whatnot. Mike, you do a great job, and again, congratulations on the Sovereign Award last week, well deserved. And I guess next time we'll see you, we'll be at this year's Queen's Plate.
Yeah, absolutely, and look forward to that. And thank you again. And Seth, I want to echo that. Look, you and everybody else that's out there in the media that works so hard, and there are so many hardworking media people that really bust their tail each and every week and every day, and they bring people these stories. just incredible, the work that so much of the media puts in, and you're right there, my friend. And, keep up the great work on your end, too. Keep doing what you're doing.
Appreciate that. Mike PENA from the Horse Racing Radio Network. Again, tune in next week for complete Derby coverage. Mike, we'll talk again.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
All right, we'll head to a break. When we come back, John White from Santa Anita. He'll take a look at a potential morning line for the Kentucky Derby, give some of his thoughts and his annual strike list as well. Stay tuned.
Another 50 yards, heavily poised. Here's the line. One Dreamer wins and scores a huge front-running upset under Gary Stevens. Heavily prized was second. You have just witnessed a felony.
Where's the best place to find your favorite teams, your favorite food, daily drink specials, and wagering on live horse racing? Legends Field Sports Bar, 711 Central Avenue, Albany. Get your game on day or night with 75 flat-screen TVs, tournament-style pool tables, a private banquet room, and live horse racing. So if someone asks you, where's the best sports bar in the Capital Region? Tell them Legends Field Sports Bar, inside the Clubhouse Racebook, 711 Central Avenue, Albany.
But Game On Dude is just battling them all off. Game On Dude has the lead. Here's Drosselmeyer out of the clouds. Drosselmeyer from nowhere. And Drosselmeyer and Mike Smith have beaten Chantel Sutherland on Game On Dude.
Visit Rivers Casino and Resort, the Capital Region's only destination for live table game action and the hottest new slots paying out millions. And they're off. Horse betting is now at Rivers Casino and Resort with Capital off-track betting terminals and live tellers located just off the gaming floor at Van Slyck's. Get in on all the action at Rivers Casino and Resort.
Welcome back to Racing Across America on this Saturday morning. We continue our Kentucky Derby conversation, joined now by John White from Santa Anita, the morning line odds maker, and more out in Southern California. So I thought we'd get a little Southern California perspective. Also hit on the strike list. We always like to get some of the thoughts from John on his take on the historical trends via the strike list. And as I say, much, much more. John, good morning.
Good morning, Seth. Good to be with you.
Happy to have you on board to talk a little Derby. And why don't we start out with the strike list, because I'm sure as we get to talking about some of the individual horses, you can toss in the strikes they have or don't have. And for folks who aren't familiar, as I say, we've touched with you various years in the past on the strike list, which takes a look at historical trends and kind of how the Derby horses are either meeting those trends or are fighting them. And over the past few years, typically the lesser strikes, the better. Now, Justify maybe threw a little monkey wrench into things last year, but again, remind people about the strike list.
Well, not only from a historical standpoint, but also a tactical standpoint. And back in 1999, I developed a system that came up with 9 key factors or categories, and what you want to do is to avoid getting a strike in that category. The key being that it isn't just stats. There's a reason behind the stats. For instance, one of the categories is that you need to have raced as a 2-year-old. Well, certainly Justify got a strike in that category, but he broke the so-called Apollo jinx. No horse had won the Kentucky Derby since 1882. Without running as a 2-year-old. And ironically, Seth, every horse that will be running in this year's Kentucky Derby did run as a 2-year-old, so we don't have to deal with that issue this year. But the key with my strike system is that the odds are in your favor to win the race if you've got 0 strikes or 1. It doesn't matter if it's 0 versus 1, but the key is having fewer than 2. And even with 2, it's not impossible, but the odds go up quite a bit once you get to 2. And then past 2, there's only been 2 horses that have had more than 2 strikes, going clear back to 1973, which is the farthest back I can go with the system because there's a couple of categories that deal with graded stakes races. And 1973 was the first year of graded stakes races of the United States. And the 2 horses with more than 2 strikes were Mine That Bird, who had 4 strikes, and Justify, who had 3. But Mine That Bird was, I would consider one of the kind of flukier Kentucky Derby winners, in history, and it wasn't a particularly strong group that year. And Justify was just an exceptional racehorse. He was an exceptional equine athlete that overcame a lot of things. And we'll never know really how great Justify was because he never lost. But unfortunately, he was retired after the Belmont Stakes, and unlike American Pharoah, his Bob Baffert Triple Crown winning counterpart, American Pharoah went on and won the Breeders' Cup Classic against older horses and did so impressively, whereas Justify we never saw race again after the Belmont Stakes in his Triple Crown.
And again, 0 or 1 strike, you have a list of them here, and we'll touch on those as we move along. And for folks who, again, aren't familiar with the system, you've mentioned some of them, the graded stakes factor, win in a graded stakes, gameness, having raced as a 2-year-old. There are those kind of historical trends that are factors. And as I say, we'll touch on, as we touch on individual horses, where they may fall in the strike category. I will say, the horse that I like and I'm finding very intriguing this year, Spinoff, I was a little bit disappointed to see him with 3 or more strikes. He winds up in that category that I don't want to see him in. But I'm still I'm going to take a little shot with Spinoff this year. But let's talk a little bit about you're out there in Southern California, so I want to take a look at the Santa Anita Derby. We'll watch the stretch run. It'll be number 1 Roadster winning, number 6 Game Runner runs second, number 5 Instagrand runs third. And I bring this up because looking at your top 10, you have Omaha Beach over Maximum Security over Game Winner. So Game Winner sits at number 3, Roadster at number 5 for you. I know a lot of people coming out of that Santa Anita Derby are tilting in favor of Roadster. What was your differentiating factors coming out of the Santa Anita Derby to put Game Winner at 3 as opposed to Roadster at number 5?
And interestingly, my top 10 is how I view a horse's chances to win the Kentucky Derby, which is why I have Maximum Security at number 2. But in the Express Bet Wager Guide, where you make your picks, I didn't pick Maximum Security 1, 2, 3, 4 because I think he's a feast or famine horse. I think Maximum Security, he can win the race, but if he doesn't win, I don't see him hitting the board. And so for selection, you're trying to pick the 1, 2, 3, 4 horses in order, whereas my top 10, again, is geared toward how I see a horse's chances to win. And the reason I have Game Winner over Roadster in both my selections and in my top 10, Game Winner is a half a length and a nose from heading to the Breeders' Cup as an undefeated Breeders' Cup Eclipse Award-winning champion. I mean, he's that close to being undefeated. And he ran much farther than Roadster did in the Santa Anita Derby, approximately 4.5 lengths, according to Trackus. So considering Game Winner only lost by a half a length, to me, that certainly, I come out of the race liking Game Winner actually better than Roadster. And you also, I think, have to take into account that for Roadster, that was an extremely important race points-wise. He didn't have the points to get into the Kentucky Derby unless he really finished first or second in the Santa Anita Derby. So Baffert had to train him accordingly. So in other words, Baffert had to train Roadster harder into the Santa Anita Derby than Game Winner because Game Winner had sufficient points, no matter what he did in the Santa Anita Derby, to get into the Kentucky Derby. That afforded Baffert the luxury with Game Winner to train him up to the Santa Anita Derby with an effort to try to win it, but not emptying the tank as much as maybe Roadster from the standpoint that Game Winner, Baffert could look at the bigger picture and keep the Kentucky Derby in mind for him.
And I'm just looking at the strike list. Only 2 horses with 0 strikes this year, Game Winner and Omaha Beach. We mentioned them. 2 strikes for Roadster. Maximum Security, and let's take a look at the Florida Derby stretch run here. You mentioned this one, and again, you have number 2 on your top 10, but you say as far as selections, leaving them out of the mix, number 7 will be Maximum Security winning the Florida Derby. I'm assuming your thought process is when you say feast or famine, kind of a pace play coming out of that Florida Derby victory.
Well, not necessarily a pace play because he doesn't have to have the early lead, and a lot of people are down on him because he set such a slow pace in the Florida Derby, but he came home his final 3 furlongs in excellent time. I mean, and yes, he's going to come home strongly when he gets to go soft early, but keep in mind, in a sprint, he laid 3rd early and was able to win the race. He does not have to have the early lead. The reason I say he's really a feast or famine horse is because we just don't know how good he is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a wild card. Anytime you're dealing with an undefeated horse, you just don't know. I mean, we could be dealing with another Seattle Slew or Justify, who were undefeated Kentucky Derby winners, or a Smarty Jones, or we could be dealing with the undefeated horses that go into the Kentucky Derby and get their bubble burst. So, I mean, it just could go either way. I know that Bob Baffert, who, of course, trains Game Winner for the same owners, Gary and Mary West, whereas Jason Service trains Maximum Security, I know Baffert feels that Maximum Security is one of the big threats to his three runners in the race. So, and by the way, I had miscalculated on one of the horses in terms of strikes, which I'll correct in my ExpressBet column next week. But Cutting Humor also has 0 strikes, so there actually are 3 horses with 0 strikes, they being Cutting Humor, Game Winner, and Omaha Beach.
Oh, Cutting Humor, interesting. As a long shot with 0 strikes. And again, looking at Maximum Security, he has 1 strike, so he fits in that 0 to 1 strike category. Where you put the contenders that, again, fit those trends as they were. I want to get your thoughts on another horse. And again, looking at your top 10, you have him at number 8. I'm interested as you talk about the difference between the top 10 and selections, what you might do with Vekoma. We're going to take a look at the stretch run to the Bluegrass here. Vekoma's going to be the number 2. Nice late run from number 8, Win. Gutsy effort from Signal Man, the number 3 horse. But Vekoma, I have liked Vekoma this year. I thought he was going to run well in the Bluegrass, but boy, that action he has, it almost looked like he was running greenly down the stretch, but he's got that right leg just kind of paddles, and with that action, you scratch your head a little bit, but he looked pretty good in the Bluegrass. Your thoughts on Vekoma?
Well, I respect him, but, I'm like you and so many, when you watch him run, it is off-putting to see that paddling action. I mean, let's put it this way, Seth. If this was an Olympic equine swimming event, I would definitely put Vekoma at the top of the list, because I think he would be by far the best swimmer of these horses. But we're not swimming in the Kentucky Derby, although some of these sloppy tracks has made it seem like they're swimming out there. He's a horse that if he won, it wouldn't surprise me. But I'm not overly on board on him. I don't think that the Bluegrass was one of the stronger of the races leading into the Kentucky Derby this year. I feel like Vekoma, if he was necessarily the real deal, he would have won the Fountain of Youth. I mean, again, Code of Honor and Bourbon War are nice horses. But the thing about Omaha Beach is, look, he's beaten Improbable and Game Winner. And to me, when you look at these horses, which is better, beating Improbable and Game Winner, or beating horses like a Win and Signal Man in the Bluegrass, or not even being able to beat Code of Honor and Bourbon War in the Fountain of Youth? So that's where just looking at these horses in terms of how they've done and who they faced and how strong the races are, as I say, I wouldn't be shocked if Vekoma won, but I would honestly be somewhat surprised.
Omaha Beach, number 1 on your Derby top 10, so I'm assuming that's the direction you're tilting coming out of the Arkansas races. And again, given a couple Arkansas races, he is a Southern California-based horse.
But I really have been on board him probably earlier than almost anybody, because he went on to my Kentucky Derby top 10 off of his maiden win in early February, and I don't think you were going to find Omaha Beach on too many Kentucky Derby top 10 lists in early February. And then after the Rebel, I debated on whether putting Omaha Beach or Game Winner at number 1. I had Game Winner at number 1 going into that race, and look, Game Winner only lost by a nose, and so my first inclination was to keep Game Winner at number 1, and then I thought, well, why? Because he did lose, and Omaha Beach did win. So I felt Omaha Beach deserved the number 1 ranking, and he solidified that ranking by then coming back and winning the Arkansas Derby. And I'm not the only one that is on board with Omaha Beach these days. Obviously, his rider, Hall of Famer Big Money Mike Smith, is aboard too, because he had the very difficult choice of riding either Omaha Beach, the Arkansas Derby winner, or Roadster, the Santa Anita Derby winner. Very few jockeys have ever had to make this tough of a choice, and really Mike Smith didn't hesitate. It wasn't an easy choice, but he made it pretty quickly after the Arkansas Derby and has opted for Omaha Beach. there's so much to like about Omaha Beach. He's got the speed. He's one of the only two horses of the entire race that's ever earned a triple-digit Beyer speed figure, which he got in the Arkansas Derby, a 101. And the only other one is Maximum Security, which is another reason I have him at number 2, because he's got a 101 and a 102. Nobody else in the entire race has ever earned a triple-digit Beyer, including Game Winner or Improbable or any of the Roadster or any of these other horses. And also for Omaha Beach, he's got the class. He's shown that by winning races like the Rebel and the Arkansas Derby. He's tractable. He's a push-button type horse. Look at that early move he made in the Arkansas Derby. And in that race, in the Arkansas Derby, it was almost not quite like a Secretariat-type move on the clubhouse turn, but then he was still able to finish off that race and hold off Improbable all the way down the stretch that day. That's really quite a weapon, that you have that kind of early speed, but yet you can then relax when Mike Smith asks you to do so, and then come home strongly like he did. And he's got Mike Smith, that's a plus. He's got Richard Mandela, that's a plus, because Richard Mandela, while he's never won the Kentucky Derby, is one of the best trainers I've ever seen in my lifetime. Don't forget that in the 2003 Breeders' Cup, back then we only had the Breeders' Cup on one day, and there were 8 Breeders' Cup races, and Richard Mandela won 4 of them. He won the juvenile fillies with Half Bridle, who was the favorite, but came out of post 14. He won the juvenile with Action This Day at 26-1. He won the turf in a dead heat with Johar at 14-1. And then he won the Classic, the Biggie, with Pleasantly Perfect at 14-1. So, he's just a tremendous trainer. And so that's another thing I think that Omaha Beach has going for him. And then the icing on the cake is we often, in recent years, have seen a wet track for the Kentucky Derby, and Omaha Beach has won twice on sloppy tracks.
Yeah, and I will say, if it comes up wet, he is clearly the favorite. But your online column, which I will tell people I'll link to over on Equidaily because I don't have it up, but I want people to take a look at the strike list. And you also have a projected Kentucky Derby odds board that I think will make people very happy, and not a surprise. We've been saying right along, favorite likely to be up in that 9-2 range, and you have Omaha Beach there. As I say, if it comes up sloppy, I think Omaha Beach becomes a clear favorite. But it's interesting, after the Santa Anita Derby, I think with the Baffert name, a lot of people were tilting towards Roadster, and then after the Arkansas Derby, Omaha Beach attracted a lot of attention. I was curious then who would wind up the favorite on Kentucky Derby Day. Your morning line, you tilted slightly in favor of Omaha Beach, 9-2, 5-1 on Roadster, 6-1 on Game Winner, 6-1 on Tacitus. From there, it all goes to double digits. Odds-wise, I think people are licking their chops to jump into this race.
Well, and that's understandable because, we don't really have an American Pharaoh type horse rolling in here or even a Justified this year. Although, I loved American Pharaoh, but a lot of people picked Dortmund in that race.
Yeah.
Don't forget, Dortmund, also trained by Baffert that year, was an undefeated Santa Anita Derby winner heading into the Kentucky Derby. So, but this year, it really, there's no clear-cut favorite. I mean, it's not impossible that Omaha Beach won't even go off as the favorite. I think he will, but like you say, Seth, if it's a wet track, I think he definitely will. But if it's not a wet track, it's not impossible for Game Winner or even Roadster to possibly go favored. Although that Mike Smith picking Omaha Beach, I mean, that made it easy for me. If I have to try to forecast what the odds are going to be, that makes it easy because I think a lot of people are going to follow along with Mike Smith, and for good reason. I mean, that's a huge endorsement for Omaha Beach. There's just no question about it.
Of course, also post position will play into it.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, there are quirky post positions that will certainly affect things. Let me ask you, as I look down the morning line, I'm wondering, we mentioned Cutting Humor, and you said the update will show Cutting Humor with no strikes. You've got him 30-1. The pick I'm playing spin-off, I think, is the clever pick for me. I'm looking at him as my pick. And again, I'm going to wait until next week and get workout reports full and get post positions and whatnot. But spin-off to me is interesting. So top pick and clever pick, maybe all in one. But you like Omaha Beach on top. Clever pick, a horse at a little bit of a price. Would it be Cutting Humor 30-1 with the 0 strikes?
Well, the thing that gets me away from cutting humor a little bit is it's kind of that one race at Sunland more than anything.
Yeah.
And it was impressive because I liked the horse a lot that ran second in that race, Another Twist of Fate, who was on my Kentucky Derby top 10, and by virtue of not winning either the Sunderland Derby or the Lexington, he's now aborted even thoughts of running in the Kentucky Derby. If he had the points, they've shipped him back to Golden Gate Fields, and he'll run in the Preakness Stakes, which he gets a fees-paid berth in the race. He's a win and you're in because he won the El Camino Real Derby at Golden Gate. He's certainly a horse that I could see actually hitting the board at a big price, and it's not absolutely out of the question, especially with 0 strikes for him, to maybe pull off the upset. I'm kind of a probability guy. A lot of people say, well, each race is its own identity. It's like flipping a coin, Seth. If you flip a coin 10 times and heads comes up 9 straight times, it doesn't change the probability when you flip the coin on the 10th time. It's still 50-50. But myself, I can't help but think that if it's 9 straight times it's come up heads, the tails is due. And the fact that we've had this run of winning favorites in the Kentucky Derby, and considering we've had periods of time in the Kentucky Derby where we haven't had the favorite win. In fact, there was a period of time not that long ago, Seth, and I know you'll remember this, that basically everybody kind of wanted to know who the favorite was because that was the first horse they were going to throw out because it was like, well, the favorite never wins the Kentucky Derby. So, this could be the type of year that we end up seeing a Giacomo at 50-1 or Mind That Bird at 50-1. But, I'm in that Omaha Beach camp. He checks all the boxes. And again, I don't know what post position he'll get. Certainly I'll be more concerned if he gets the 1. But even there, to show you how much I like him, he's a good gate horse. He comes out of there alertly. And Mike Smith could actually use some of his early speed to get into a second, third, fourth position early. And the Kentucky Derby in recent years, the last 5 of them, the horse has either been second or third early to win it. And I always focus, one of my categories in my strikes is looking for horses that will be first or second at the 8th pole. And that's because 53 of the last 56 Kentucky Derby winners have been first or second at the 8th pole. Even a horse like Orb, who came from back 16th and 17th early, he was second at the 8th pole that day and was able to get the win. Mind That Bird was another one way back early, but was first or second at the 8th pole. So, and that's one reason why back in 2005, my top pick in the race was Closing Argument, who went off at odds of 71-1, because I felt he had a pretty good chance to maybe be first or second with an 1/8 of a mile to go. Well, indeed, he was in front with an 1/8 of a mile to go, and he led that entire final furlong until Giacomo and who? Mike Smith was able to get up in the closing strides and win the race. But, even though I didn't have the winner that year, Seth, I feel proud because Closing Argument paid $70 for a $2 place ticket. That's still the highest place payoff. It's the record place payoff in the history of the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, and don't be ashamed of a place ticket when it pays $70.
That's right, exactly.
I say that to people all the time. Don't feel bad if you got the show of the place ticket if they're paying better than the winner.
I had played him in the future book and had a big price on him, so I didn't even bet him, on Derby Day, win, place, or show. But he certainly gave me a big run for my money. But because I bet him in the future book, unfortunately, I didn't even make any money with him, and I came that close to a really big score. But like I say, that's an aspect of the Kentucky Derby that's always fascinated me because people have an image in their head of a 1.25 mile race at Churchill Downs with that long stretch, and they think, well, the winner must come from way back and be charging at the end. Well, even when the winner is coming from far back, they're not charging at the end. They make that move on the far turn, and they put themselves in what I call that prime position at the 8th pole. And this is another reason I absolutely love Omaha Beach in this race, because I think he has an absolutely, tremendous chance with his tactical speed and Mike Smith. I mean, I'll be surprised if he's not first or second with an 1/8 of a mile to go, and that tremendously increases his chances to win this race.
Yeah, that 8th pole factor to me kind of jumps out as well, because you do want to be up in the mix. You don't want to come from the cloud style to be at the top of the stretch, and just because of the size of the field and the tactics and whatnot. So again, you want a horse that does have a little bit of tactical speed, or if it is a come from behind in previous races, has at least been in it as they've gotten to the top of the stretch. John, before we let you go, just want to shift gears slightly here. Kentucky Oaks, and take a look at the Santa Anita Oaks from April 6th. Number 5, Bellafina, will be the winner in a short field of only 4. I'm just wondering your thoughts on Bellafina. Does she have this group over a barrel? I'm looking at the leaderboard here for the Kentucky Oaks. Champagne Anyone is interesting. Restless Rider for Kenny McPeak is interesting to me. And I'll tell you what, Dunbar Road, if that one gets in off the bubble, becomes intriguing. But Bellafina just looks, to me, to maybe have that Oaks over a barrel.
Well, I think that actually myself, that Bellafina, she certainly is the one to beat, but I think she's going to be overbet.
Yeah.
And, she only got an 89 buyer in that Santa Anita Oaks. It's not like she's got big buyer power over the rest of this field. In other words, like Champagne Anyone, who I think has a very good chance to win this race, that in fact would be my pick to win the race. She got a 90 in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, so, there's not great separation there between Bellafina and Champagne Anyone, and I like the fact that Champagne Anyone, seemed to run better with the blinkers added last time, and this is a really terrific trainer, Ian Wilkes, who worked so alongside Carl Nasker, who won the Kentucky Derby with Street Sense and Unbridled, and I think this filly, who is by Kentucky Derby winner Street Sense, is really blossoming right now. I think she's one to really take a look at. And there's several in here. Like you say, Restless Rider, I've always liked ever since her debutante win at Churchill Downs last year. She almost, she had severe trouble in that race. Just got stopped cold and ended up winning by over 11 lengths. And that was just a fantastic performance. And she's been pointed for this race by Kenny McPeak. Who's to say Jay Walk might not put things back together? Everybody's kind of jumped off of her, but heck, she was the champion. She looked so good in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. If she were to win, people would say, oh, well, there's the real Jay Walk we've been waiting for this year, so I certainly wouldn't say she's impossible. But I'll tell you who my real wild card is in this race. It's a filly that I know they've been very high on at the Bob Baffert barn. She's a daughter of two-time Breeders' Cup Classic winner Tisnow, and this is a filly that, once Florida Lamar got beat by Bellafina in the Santa Anita Oaks, Bob Baffert could have just as well kept Florida Lamar at home and not worried about the Kentucky Oaks. The fact that he's gone ahead with her to the Kentucky Oaks, I think, is really telling us she's very live in this spot. As I say, they're very high on her. She was 1-5 favorite in her debut and won like a good thing, although her buyer wasn't much. And then she did not handle a sloppy track at all in her second start. And yes, she was beaten last time by Bellafina, but keep in mind that was only Florida Lamar's third career start. So we're only scratching the surface with her. And the fact that I think Bob Baffert feels that she can close that gap on Bellafina by virtue of the fact he's going to go runner in this race, and look at the price you're probably going to get on Florida Lamar, Seth. I think you got to be looking at 15, 20 to 1 on this filly, and I think she's very live.
Yeah, she was behind Bellafina, but beat the other Baffert runner Chasing Yesterday, who's a nice 3-year-old filly in her own right in that Santa Anita Derby. John, got to go, but boy, we always appreciate the conversation. Wish you a lot of luck heading into Derby and Oaks weekend with your selections, and certainly we will talk again.
Sounds good, Seth. It's always good to chat with you, and it should be a very interesting Kentucky Oaks and probably even more interesting Kentucky Derby this year.
Absolutely. John White from Santa Anita. Appreciate the visit.
You're watching OTB TV, a service of Capital Off Track Betting.